Hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome to the meeting of the Local Pension Board. My name is Brian Smith from Legal Services and I'm opening the meeting as there is, as a first item of business, a need to consider the election of a new chairman for this meeting and going forward. I wonder if I could ask for nominations of chairman from the board members, please.
Afternoon, my name is Ian Densham, scheme member representative on the Local Pension Board. So I'd like to propose a motion that we nominate Amanda Hopgood as the new chairman of the Local Pension Board for the coming year.
And do I have a seconder for that, please?
Good afternoon, I'm Neville Hancock, scheme member representative, and I'll second that motion.
Thank you. All in favour?
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Yep. Councillor Hopgood, welcome. And I wonder if I could invite you to take the chair for the remainder of this meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this remote meeting of the Local Pension Board, taking place on the 3rd of December 2020. It's being recorded live to the Council's website and will be available to view for a minimum of 6 months. Please be aware that any footage from the meeting can be used in subsequent media broadcasts, and I would like to welcome Local Pension Board members, officers and any members of the public or media who are watching this live feed of the meeting. Before I commence with the formal business on the agenda, I'd like to cover some of the housekeeping issues for us all to follow. If you haven't already done so, could you please mute your microphone? To speak, can you use the chat function on the right-hand side? If you want to speak, if you could type in RTS, request to speak, and please remember that everyone in the meeting can see the messages displayed in the chat function. When invited to speak, please remember to unmute your microphone. And once invited to speak by me as the chair, please introduce yourself with your name and position, unless you've already done so earlier in the meeting. If you're having any issues with connectivity, if you try switching off your video and use just the telephone function. If connectivity issues continue, you may have to leave the meeting and rejoin for a better signal. And if my connection is lost at any point during the meeting, I'll ask Ian Densham to take over the chair. So if we can move on to formal business on the agenda, please. Item 2, Jill, have we got any apologies for absence?
No, Chair, we have no apologies for absence.
Right. Can I also at this stage welcome Les Oliver to his first formal meeting of the Pension Board. Unfortunately, it's in different circumstances, but welcome all the same. Do we have any declarations of interest? Item 3? No. Item 4, minutes of the last meeting held on the 10th of September 2020. I don't think we did. Did we have a meeting on that date?
Chair, I think that should read the 12th of March 2020.
Yes. Yeah. Now, if anyone can remember back to the 12th of March, are we happy that they're a true record of the minutes from that date? We've got a mover for that?
Yeah, I'll move that, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you. Right, item 5, matters arising since the last meeting of the board. Is there any outstanding matters arising from anyone? Paul?
Thanks, Chair. I thought it might be worth at this juncture just to, for the benefit of the members of the board, just update on kind of what's happened since the last meeting of the board and what's gone on in the pension fund and how services have been delivered for members. So the board last met in March, and obviously we're in a very different world than we were then. But just to give some reassurance to the board that services have continued to be to scheme members and participating employers. Teams delivering pension services have worked from home since March, but we have made sure they've had the necessary technology to be able to deliver those services. particularly during the lockdown, we had a real focus on retirements and bereaved families to ensure the benefits were paid in a timely fashion, and that happened and has continued to happen. Additionally, we've ensured that the telephone helpline available to scheme members has continued to be available during normal office hours since lockdown, and that's been continuing uninterrupted. So members haven't noticed a difference in the delivery of that service. They've been able to raise a query with the pension fund and get an answer during normal office hours. Additionally, in respect to member services, I think it's well worth mentioning for the benefit of the board that we launched online services for members. That was launched on the 31st of August, and that meant that scheme members were able to access their pension records online. They're able to raise queries with the fund through the secure web portal. They can calculate their own retirement benefits at their own leisure. They don't need to rely on the fund to provide them figures through the post. They can do that on demand as and when they require, and they can produce as many calculations as they like. The launch has been successful and has proved popular with the scheme membership, and to date we've had around 8,500 scheme members register for the system so far, which is pretty good given that we only launched on the 31st of August. And amongst that cohort, we've had thousands of calculations run as members take up that service and use the opportunity to run their own retirement calculations. In respect to the fund's assets, the Pension Fund Committee has continued to meet and make the necessary decisions in respect of assets. And in June, the committee met and took the decision to move the fund's index-linked gilts from the existing manager, Royal London, into the Board of the Coast pool, and that transition happened successfully during October. So those assets are now within the Board of the Coast pool. Additionally, Beverley's team have successfully completed the work necessary on the annual report and accounts, and that was reported into committee today. So all of the big projects that probably would have been expected have been completed as we've delivered services from home. Hope that's a useful summary, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
It is. Thank you, Paul. Ian, you've got a question? You're still on mute.
Yeah, this comes somewhere between a suggestion and a question. Bear in mind the last meeting of the local pension board was on the 12th of March, and of course it's now the 3rd of December. Is it a good idea for the local pension board to receive a summary of the decisions taken by the pension fund committee during that period between those two dates? Just a brief summary of all the things that have been decided.
Yeah. Paul, want to answer that?
Sorry, yeah. Is the suggestion, Ian, that would be a written report to the board?
Yeah, just a written report, and it's recorded in writing, just what's been decided by the pension fund committee in the meantime.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely fine if that would be useful for members of the board. Absolutely, I'll bring that report to the board in the meeting in March.
Thank you. Neville, did you have a question?
Yes, Paul. On the online portal, when members put in for early retirement calculations, does it take account of the reduction for early retirement?
It does, yes, Neville. That's a good question. So the calculation, if a scheme member goes into the system, we only make available the
welcome back to the Pension Board. If I can go straight back to Paul Cooper, who can respond to the question from Neville, please.
Thanks, Chair. So yes, to answer the question, the online services that we've launched for members, the calculation that's available to members through the online portal provides members with a summary of the reduced benefits that are payable to them upon retirement, and that means that there's no overstating of benefits. The figures that members see are what they'd actually receive on a reduced basis at the date of retirement.
Thank you. Ian, do you have a question? Yeah, you're on mute.
I'm not sure if it's best raised under the matters arising since the last meeting or under observations of the Pension Fund Committee this morning. But one thing I noticed was we're moving towards investing in the MAC product from BCPP, and Mercer has advised that that's a suitable investment for us. But I also noticed in the documentation that Mercer was also involved in doing due diligence on the fund managers that BCPP had selected for that. So is that a potential conflict of interest? Mercer both advising them it's a suitable investment and then deciding the fund managers, does that create a conflict of interest? And what I couldn't see written down in the documentation pack is the independent advisors' view. So Anthony Fletcher from MH, from Allenbridge, about what his view is on the MAC product.
Shall I respond to that one, Chair?
Yes, please.
So yeah, both questions relating to MAC, I guess. Regarding Mercer supporting board of recourse in the selection process, I don't think there's a conflict of interest, given that there were their role was in assisting board of recourse in finding the best managers. I don't think there's any kind of conflict. They certainly weren't appointing Mercer. You know, it was a selection of external managers that would best deliver. But for reassurancy, what I could do is ask for Anthony Fletcher, our independent advisor, to provide comment on that, which again I would bring back to the board in March. But certainly when I spoke to Anthony about that myself, I don't think there was any perceived conflict or certainly nothing out of the ordinary. In respect of the independent advisor's view on MAC, I think it's fair to reflect that the committee have considered this over a protracted period. So the committee first gave an intention to, in principle, to invest in MAC in December 2019. There's training in advance of that, and there's been training ongoing since December 2019 up to date. And the last training session of the committee on this was as recent as the 27th of November. And Anthony Fletcher, the independent advisor, was present at all of those sessions. So he was able to give a view in the training sessions, support members and answer any questions, and certainly was supportive of the approach that we're taking.
Yeah, I just wondered if it was written down in the same way as what the letter of investment suitability is from Mercer, for something of that sort of format from Anthony saying a similar conclusion.
Yeah, typically we would commission a letter from the investment consultant. Obviously we did. Got that letter from Mercer, which was supportive of the board of recourse product. Anthony's party to that letter. He sees that in advance of the committee meeting, and if he has any issues, he has the opportunity to raise any concerns he has over the investment. Certainly, he didn't have concerns to raise after reviewing the materials.
Right. Okay.
Thanks, Ian. If we move on to item number 6, which is the observations from the Pension Fund Committee held this morning. Ian, I think that was partly that. For anyone else who was there this morning, do you have any comments to make? Ian, do you want to go with that one?
Yeah, I wasn't present at the meeting itself, but even remotely. But I did have a few questions raised by the documentation pack for the meeting, so I'll just run through those. The report from the the internal assurance, the internal audit. There was 3 items that we were busy working on. pensions, payroll, bank reconciliation, and benefits. And all three of those were received a substantial rating, which, if I remember correctly, is one less than the maximum rating that it can give. So I just had a question of why was it not the maximum rating, and what steps have been taken to address any concerns that they raised to get it back to the maximum rating.
Chair, I could probably answer that one quite quickly if possible. Substantial is indeed the highest rating that we can achieve. So substantial is the highest level of assurance internal audit can provide.
Right, that answers that, because I thought it was one level higher than that, but that answers that. Yeah, and just the other thing was the funding levels looking positive. It's raised to 94% from the previous 81% it was at the last triennial evaluation. But there's obviously no caution that that's just valid as of the 31st of March 2019, and of course a lot's happened since. So the next triennial evaluation, which would be the value as of the 31st of March 2022, is going to be a very interesting thing when that time finally comes.
Right, thanks, Ian. Neville?
Yes, thanks, Amanda. It's a question for Paul. Paul, in your submission this morning, you gave an overview and you touched on the MCLG consultation on reform and exit pay. And I believe the consultation has been extended to the 18th of December. Did Durham County Council put put forward anything into the consultation?
Sorry, it took me a moment to get unmuted. Yeah, the MHCLG consultation, we didn't reply to that one.
Okay, Fraser, I've got you next to speak.
Yeah, first of all, just apologies for joining the meeting a little bit late there. But I just one question. I wasn't at the meeting this morning, but just is it possible just to remind of what our exposure is to commercial property through the fund, and obviously what's happening with COVID and everything of that nature? Because I know in the past when I've been at the full pension committee meetings, there's been a presentation often, and that is one of the key investment areas. And I just wonder, obviously what's going on, it's probably wise that we just do a minute our just awareness of that issue going forward.
Paul, are you able to respond to that? Thanks.
My apologies, my system's going incredibly slow, and getting it off mute quickly is not happening for me. Yeah, so we still have property exposure in the fund through CBRE. So CBRE are our external managers who manage our global property fund. So we don't have a sort of UK centric mandate. It is a global property fund, and I think it was one of the issues that was touched upon at committee today. So we have a 7% allocation to global property, and I think that was the types of questions that were asked around impact of COVID. And if we think about things like retail sector on the high street, clearly not doing so well, and issues like that. And I guess the flip side of that coin is there's opportunities presented by the impact of COVID around warehouses and distribution centres, as the general public have shifted towards companies like Amazon and things like that. Commercial warehousing and things like that will start to do well. So what we would be looking for our external managers to do is to spot these trends early and invest with a long-term mindset. Now, clearly property is an asset class that we can't be moved out of quickly. So the underlying managers should already have been thinking about these things. So for all COVID has brought home to roost some of the issues with retail and the high street, these were issues before COVID, and the managers should have been thinking about this already. Going forward, we're obviously monitoring very closely what Board of the Coast are doing in this sphere. Board of the Coast will launch a UK property offering as well as a global property offering. The UK offering would afford funds direct property ownership. At the moment, we invest in a sort of fund of funds basis. but we would be able to access direct property through Board of the Coast and leverage our scale as part of the pool. And I have to say, what we've seen from Board of the Coast already, they're very mindful of these trends, and they have to be because of the long-term nature of property.
Thanks, Paul. My observations this morning were, I think that the committee really quizzed, and there was some deep dive questions of the asset managers, of the advisors. They went into environmental issues, things like Fraser's just raised, the high street, that kind of thing. So I thought it was a really good meeting in terms of challenge and questioning. And the board, you could say, I know there was training last week taking place. So from our perspective as a pension board, I think what the committee were doing was on the lines of what we would expect to see. Does anyone else have any other observations from this morning's pension fund meeting? No. You're happy? Then we'll move on to item 7, which is the pension fund valuation. I'm not sure if this is Paul or Beverly who's taking us through this.
It is Paul, but it looks like he's got issues.
Yeah, I think he's gone.
Yes, we've lost Paul. Beverly, are you able to take over, or would you like us to suspend the meeting for a while till we see if we can get Paul back in?
Can we suspend for a short while, please?
Yeah. Right. Paul, are you ready to take over the pension fund evaluation section, please?
Thanks, Chair. So the valuation, as we've already touched upon in this meeting, values the fund's assets as at the 31st of March 2019. And since the last meeting of the local pension board, the valuation process has been successfully brought to a conclusion. So the regulatory background, if you like, Regulation 62 of the Local Government Pension Scheme Regulations requires us, in our capacity as admin authority of the pension fund, to obtain that actuarial valuation of the assets and liabilities as at the 31st of March in each third year. So the fund's actuary, Aon Hewitt, were commissioned to produce a valuation report, which is attached as an appendix to my report. And that valuation report contains the rates and adjustment certificate required under the regulations. Under Regulation 66, the report must be published and made available to the Secretary of State, and I can confirm to the board that was done in advance of the required deadline of the 31st of March. And all employers were notified of their individual contribution rates in advance of the 1st of April when they became effective. The real high level terms, the main findings were that the fund's assets had increased, which is obviously good news. The fund was valued at just under 3 billion, up from 2.3 billion at the last valuation. Liabilities continue to increase, up from 2.85 to 3.18 billion. But overall, this asset and liability balance meant that the funding level had really improved. So from 81% at the last valuation up to 94%. Welcome any questions from the board, really.
Does anyone have any questions for Paul on this report? I think it makes for really good reading going forwards, given the current climate and where we are. So thank you. I'm assuming that radio silence means we've got all happy with the report. Thank you. Item 8, KPI verbal update. Paul?
Thanks, Chair. I managed not to disconnect myself that time. KPIs, so it's one of the items that's listed as for consideration of the board. And when we have talked about this previously, we have discussed the Local Government Pension Scheme Advisory Board, SAB, are looking to introduce standardised KPIs across the LGPS so that we can get a sort of meaningful comparison on the same sort of KPIs from fund to fund. And that would be a useful tool for reporting into the board. There's some development work in the system to be able to report on those KPIs. But it was useful that the board met in the beginning of November, and there's kind of a framework for what the recommended KPIs are likely to be. So with the agreement of the board from the 1st of April, we'll start to report on those KPIs that are currently in the draft form of the SAB's recommendations. At some point, SAB will mandate KPIs in statutory guidance. It seems likely that they've settled on these now. We've done some development work to have these ready. And to give you a flavour of what they look like, it would be reporting on pensioners set up within disclosure timeframes. So given the focus of our work, that's something that we should score well on. So the measures, are you quickly setting up people when they retire to make sure they receive the pension in the lump sum? Where a pension fund would fail on that KPI is where someone doesn't respond. So I would stress that you would never hit 100% because sometimes individuals might not reply, but I think that would be a useful KPI to feed in. There'll be another KPI on call centre, so essentially our helpline that we man, so calls answered first time. So we will be able to report to the board on that, and haven't had sort of informal reports on the numbers. It's an area where we do well, and it's pleasing that we've scored highly on that when we've looked at that internally, particularly during COVID and lockdown. We've had a lot of queries and we've been able to answer those successfully. And then on top of that, there'll likely be some sort of standard numbers that won't fluctuate other than on year, and that'll be on things like data scoring. So we'll score, as we already do, we'll score our common data and our conditional data, and that'll hold for the year. It'll be updated each year, but we'll report that into the board as well. So hopefully that'll be a useful addition to the information that the board received from officers, and we'll be able to start report on that effective from the 1st of April.
Thanks, Paul. Does anyone have any questions for Paul on that, or we're happy to agree to that? Yeah. So item 9, the fund discretions verbal update. I'm assuming we're back over to you again, Paul.
Fortunately, I didn't mute myself in between that time. So just on this one, it was a verbal update. This is the sort of last piece of the work plan that we need to, as a board need to look at. So I will be bringing a report to the board in March on that, and that would kind of complete the overview of the topics that the board agreed to consider as part of the work plan. So this kind of bleeds into any other business slightly, so forgive me, Chair, but what I would propose for March is to bring a revised work plan to look ahead at the next couple of years and what the board would then consider going forward, having completed the items on the existing work plan. Clearly, when I bring that in March, there might be things that members want to tweak or change, and that's fine. But I think if we bring a framework in March, that'll be useful going forward, because that'll be that agreeing the discretions for the new financial year will be the last piece of the current work plan.
That would be great, thank you. Has anyone got any questions on that, or all happy to move with that? Yep. Right. Jill, do we have a date for the next meeting in March, please?
Yes, Chair. The next meeting is proposed for the 11th of March at 2 p.m, which will follow the Pension Fund Committee.
Okay. And finally, item 11, has anyone got any items of any other business, please? No? Oh, Neville? Oh,
yeah,
Neville.
it's not an item of any of the business, but and I'll be diplomatic and kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I'd like to thank Paul for following the training last week. He sent a glossary out of terms, and as a board member, we all have to have knowledge and understanding to be elected onto this board. And I just like to say, while I thank you, I don't think that we really needed it.
Thanks. Ian?
Yeah, just now Neville's raised that point about the training sessions that have been held. I think those have been excellent. The pension fund committee, to make its decisions, has to have the adequate knowledge and training. And one of the remits of the local pension board is to look at how that's provided. And I think that's the sort of thing that is very good practice to do before there's any investment decisions taken to go into new products or make significant changes to investments. So those sessions I think have been excellent. One thing I noticed in the Chancellor's statement a fortnight ago now, where you mentioned the creation of an infrastructure investment bank to be headquartered in the north of England, and the involvement of pension schemes in that was sort of hinted. Has there been any information from the government to LGPS schemes about that yet?
Not that I'm aware of yet, Ian, but it's something we'll keep a close eye on. And I guess just as a reminder, one of the key drivers of pooling was for the ability of pension funds to invest in infrastructure, which this fund has done through board. Of course, we already invest in their infrastructure sleeve.
Yeah, that answers it, I think.
Okay, thank you. If that's it from everyone, last chance. No? In that case, that concludes the business for today. And before the broadcast ends, I'd like to thank those